Too Long Didn't Read, brought to you by the Alan Turing Institute, the National Institute for Data Science and AI. Hello, welcome to Too Long Didn't Read, AI and data science news carefully hand-picked, lovingly wrapped and delicately delivered directly to your ears' holes. I'm Jonah, the digital content producer here at the Turing, and here's my partner in pod.
I'm Smera, a researcher in data justice and global ethical futures.
This month, as the children went back to school, we've read about the first teacherless classroom. That's with an AI replacement, of course, not just an empty space where the teacher should be. There's been developments in the antitrust case against Google that Smera mentioned last month.
Yes, and there is also a US investigation into NVIDIA,
Oh, your favourite.
But we also have news that DeepMind have made huge leaps into an AI system for designing protein binders, which will serve as a building block for biological and health research. But what are we focusing on this month, Jonah?
This month, we will be asking if relying on AI for law enforcement is a good thing or just a step 2 Minority Report.
We also look at the brand new AI treaty. It's sure to be an AI treaty.
And we look at how AI technology created for innocuous purposes can end up being adopted for less innocent means. Have you seen Minority Report, Smera?
I actually have not, although I feel like I should.
Oh, wow, yeah, you should. So, for you and others who haven't seen it, it's a futuristic Steven Spielberg film. It is based on a book, but anyway. Tom Cruise running around, shooting, saying cool one-liners and stuff, and the premise is that there are these mutant people floating around in some gross slime, and they predict future crimes, somehow, and then the pre-crime police squad go and arrest the person who is predicted to commit the crime, even though they don't know that they're going to commit the crime. So, some big ideas there. It's basically a philosophical debate of free will versus determinism dressed up as a high-octane action film with mutants in sludge. So, what's the story, Smera? Is it a bit of a stretch to claim this is Minority Report-esque?
I think we'll have to see, but to give everyone a background, the story is that the Argentinian president, Javier Milei, has created an artificial intelligence applied security unit. The legislation says that it will patrol social networks and the darknet to identify crimes and perpetrators, analyze security footage in real time, perform surveillance using drones, have robots stand in for humans to complete dangerous tasks like, bomb disposal, detect suspicious financial activity, and most importantly, this is the very interesting one, use machine learning algorithms to analyze historical crime data to predict future crimes and help prevent them. The article that tells the story mostly focuses on that last line, the bit about predicting future crime. That's your Minority Report element.
Okay.
But it is our job to look beyond the hype and see what the implications of this story could be.
Okay, cool. So can we start with agreeing that surely crime is mostly a bad thing, or at least most crime is mostly bad or harmful to someone, and limiting it is a good thing?
Oh, Jonah, sweet, naive Jonah. There's a lot more to it than just that. So, brief history of this. The idea of using machine learning to analyze past crime to predict future crime is not a new concept and has been tested and implemented to varying degrees all over the world, including the UK.
Okay.
There are a lot of ethical and socio-political implications to unpack here, from privacy invasions, algorithm bias based on much deeper historical societal biases, and so forth. Evidence that monitoring potential criminals inhibits their future as they try to move on from those crimes, and so forth. But you can read more about this in Cathy O'Neill's Weapons of Mass Destruction or Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology.
Okay.
However, we have talked a lot about biases and vulnerable groups in past episodes, and the articles that cover this story do a good job there. So we're going to look at this from a very different perspective. I am with you. Most crime is mostly bad. So with development of more and more AI tools for law enforcement, let's look at how effective they actually are.
Okay, yeah, so it sounds like it's time to bring out our guest. This month, we are joined by Turing Fellow, Dr. Melina Kuna. Melina is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Warwick. She's an expert in attention, and her current research examines human-AI interactions and how people attend to AI prompts in tasks such as medical screening for cancers. Her research also investigates optimal ways for humans to interact with AI and technology to maximise the benefits while minimising the costs, such as over-reliance effects and bias. Melina, hello. You're an expert in attention. I sometimes worry about my attention span, but never for long. Hi, sorry about that.
Hello, thank you for inviting me here.
You're regretting it already.
Before you regret too much and before Jonah goes off on another joke, could you please give us a summary of your research and your interest in this field?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm a cognitive psychologist with a research interest in how humans interact with technology and with artificial intelligence, or AI. I think it's an absolutely fascinating time to be involved in this field. The landscape of AI has changed dramatically in the last few years, and a lot of research has been looking at how AI and machine learning has been developed. However, most of these AI systems still need a human somewhere in the loop, and that is not as well researched. So, for example, a lot of these AI systems might produce a recommendation that a person, will have to either accept or evaluate before making the final decision. And although a lot of research has been looking at how AI is developed and the technology behind it, there is a lot of research that still needs to look at how humans interact with this AI, because it really does affect how we make our decisions, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse.
So what are the problems and benefits, of course, of using these tools to predict crime and enforce law?
There are a lot of benefits of using AI, but they also come with costs. So some of the benefits is that AI can use lots of pattern recognition. It can bring lots of information together, and that's really helpful for humans to make right decisions. However, they do come with costs. So I can give you an example from my research. So I look at how AI is used in healthcare, and AI can be used to help with a number of different problems. One of the problems we have is in breast screening, for example, where thousands and thousands and thousands of women a year come into breast screening centre to have a mammogram, which will produce an image that a clinical reader, a human, will then look at and to determine if the woman has a cancer or not. So this is great. It's helpful for women. The problem being is that not many women actually have cancers. Only less than 1% of women will actually have a cancer. So trying to find the women that have cancers and trying to find that cancer in a very complex image is very, very difficult for a human. The clinical readers are highly trained. They've got lots of experience, but still it's an incredibly difficult task. And in fact, the research has shown from our labs and other labs around the world with very clever people looking at this, the research has found that when you're looking for something that only appears rarely, so less than 1% of the time, you miss about 30% of these items. So that's 30% of cancers that are going undetected, which is a big problem. So this is where AI can really, really help. So you can have AI systems that are being developed to actually detect patterns in breast tissue, flag these up on mammograms, so the clinical reader can then actually find the cancer or see something that's been flagged as a cancer and make a final decision about whether that's a cancer or not. That's great. That really, really helps. But there is a cost that humans become very reliant on this technology very, very quickly. So there are problems when the AI system doesn't flag up a cancer for some reason, it's missed it. In that case, the human will say, there's no cancer here. If there would be, the AI system would have found it, and this woman is less likely to be diagnosed as having a cancer, or their cancer is not found. On the other hand, as well, you have systems which may flag up a woman who doesn't have a cancer and say, there's something here that looks suspicious. This woman might need to be recalled for further treatment. So this woman doesn't have a cancer at all, but because the AI system has flagged up something, then they're more likely to be recalled, which is not great for that woman because they've been recalled unnecessarily. There's a lot of anxiety that comes with that. That anxiety is long lasting, and it's not great for the healthcare system because it's overburdened if too many people are coming back to be recalled falsely when they don't need to be. So this example flags up both the benefits of AI and costs. And you can see a similar factors would happen in a crime area as well, where AI systems might flag up different communities as having different propensity to crime unnecessarily. And then these communities are going to be harassed. There's going to be unfair deployment of crime resources. And there might be other situations where the AI doesn't flag up dangerous behavior because it doesn't fit the pattern. But also humans will then think, oh, well, the AI's not flagged it up. We don't need to follow it further. And that's where it leads to problems.
Yeah. And maybe if you could elaborate more on that last point you're making about how, humans start to make there's this over-reliance on it. Where else do we see humans and this effectiveness being affected due to AI?
Well, AI is prolific. The great thing about AI is it's a fantastic tool that can pervade every part of our society, every part of humanity. It is involved in healthcare, it's involved in education, governments are using it, defense is using it. So because of that, there is a danger that we become over-reliant in all these aspects. So I've already used examples about healthcare. You've been discussing examples about the judicial system and crime and police forces. But it could happen in all different aspects of humanity where AI is going to be used. And I think it will be used across a lot of different aspects of society.
Okay, cool. So with all these tools that are piling on, is there a chance that we become more reliant on them? And when and if our crutches are removed, then are we going to be useless?
No, certainly. We see massive reliance effects in our data and our experiments. People really do rely on these tools really quickly. And you don't even have to look at laboratory experiments for this or research for this. I'm sure everyone at some point has got an anecdote when they've used Google Maps and Google Maps has pushed them into a field where if they hadn't been doing that, they'd realize that this is not, the leisure centre that I'm supposed to go to or the cinema I'm supposed to go to. This is a field with cows. Yeah. So we do become reliant on this technology, and it does stop us from actually using our resources, from learning routes, to use the Google Maps analogy. So we definitely become over-reliant on this technology. It can be a crutch, but sometimes it's meant to be a crutch. So Google Maps is meant to remove the burden of map reading while you're driving. Of course, it's useful. And that's also to say that when this technology, or if this technology disappears, it's not that we're all going to be mindless people unable to do anything. We're resilient as humans. Our brains are fantastic at learning. So even if we somehow get into a dystopia where AI is no longer available, we will be able to rebuild our skills. We will be able to get back to some level of normalcy, some level of intelligence.
Okay, that gives me hope for the zombie apocalypse then.
That's really interesting, especially the part that you said that we as humans are really resilient and that our brains are capable of learning all this information. And it makes me think about the possibility that we can also learn biases from systems themselves. We already know that we are embedding our own human biases into some of these systems, but there are papers that suggest that we also learn some of these biases from technology. So, do we need to worry about this kind of inherited bias?
Oh, absolutely. We can inherit biases from AI. So humans learn under a number of different circumstances. So as you already mentioned, if you grew up in a biased or prejudiced household, you're going to learn those prejudices and have to unlearn them when you get into a different circumstance. And it's the same with humans interacting with AI. So AI is a tool in this case that's used for learning. So it helps and it affects your learning process. So if you've been trained or learned or trained in learning with a biased AI, that is going to affect your decision making regardless. So it's the same in this aspect. You can think of AI like a human. If a human has taught you this is the bias or this is the prejudice, of course you're going to pick up on that. If an AI system or this tool has said that this is the bias or this is the prejudice, then of course that's how you've learnt it, and that's how you'll carry on until you're taught otherwise.
So bringing it slightly back to crime, what about the people who are at the other end, us civilians? So we're talking a lot, about the implications of the police force and law enforcement people using these technologies. And how does it affect the people that it will be used upon? What are the sort of psychological implications on us? Could there be a sort of huge movement to reject AI tools, or could there be this lurch towards everybody trusting every result and judgment that is given by the AI, perhaps trusting it to a fault sort of thing?
I think that is a very good question. And I think it comes back to what people know about AI and how much people, like you say, trust AI. And that is a big issue in the field. So as I mentioned before, a lot of work has been done into AI systems and machine learning and how they're being developed, but not much research has been done on how humans interact with it. One of the things that we're finding is that if you tell people an AI system is amazing, then people will use that system. Right. And people will become to over rely on that system. So we're finding that healthcare all the time. If you have a system, going back to my previous anecdote about mammography and breast screening, if you have a system where the clinicians think this is great, then they will over rely on it. The way to combat that is to really flag up the downsides of the AI system. So you flag up that it has problems in this. You can get over reliant. It can cause you to miss cancers. It can cause you to recall people that you don't need to. In that case, you still keep the benefits of the AI system because it's still flagging up the important aspects to you, but it will help you to think about your judgments. It will help you to think about your decisions more. So you're not then over reliant on the system. And I think that's really, really key. There's been other research as well. A big thing in governance of AI is to let people know, or there's been a push to let people know how transparent these AI systems are, how they make their decisions. But what we're finding counterintuitively is if you tell people a little bit about how accurate the AI is or how it's making the decisions, then people start to trust the AI a little bit more. And then they start to over rely on the AI a little bit more. So although there's good intentions about this explainable AI, it does have unforeseen costs with how humans interact with it.
That's really interesting. So the more you know about the AI you might be using, the more you might trust and rely on it, even if you have actually learned the opposite. The very fact that you have more insight translates as more trust. Can you give us an idea of how the Argentinian government, or any government using AI to help law enforcement, can make sure they do so fairly and safely?
Yep, I think that's also a crucial question. So as I said, a lot of very clever and very important people are looking at how we need to use AI and regulate AI. We also need to look at AI literacy, which is what people know about AI. I think that's key as well. So these systems predominantly can be used for good, but we need to understand how they are used, why they are used, and what the downsides are. If we get people who are using these AI systems and making decisions based on these systems, if we educate them in how to use AI, when to use them, and what the costs can be, what the fallout can be, then I think they can be used quite effectively. In our research, we have done a number of different studies where we've tried to mitigate the costs within healthcare and AI. And even just simple ways of how you present AI to people or what you tell people about AI really does make massive differences in how they use it.
So this podcast is vital, Ben.
I'd say so.
So I've got a philosophical one for both of you. What would you say to those people who say, well, I don't commit crime, so what have I got to worry about? I don't mind if people are being surveilled and monitored and our data's being collected, you know. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time. What would you say to that? I don't commit crime, so why should I worry?
Again, it's a very, very good question. And I think it really comes down to, again, the powerful tools we have. So 10 years back, 20 years back, we could give people a lot of information about us and, that's fine. They have some information about us. But now using machine learning, using AI, it can actually, the more data it has, the more it knows about us. Sometimes that can be good. Sometimes it's not harmful. Sometimes it's fine. But we don't have any control over that data. It can be used, and it has been used in the past for harmful purposes. So as I said, it's because AI is such now a powerful system, what it learns about us can be extrapolated and we have no control over it.
Yeah, okay. Smera, have you got a differing opinion or do you want to add to that?
I have more of I don't know if it's a philosophical one, but it's definitely less to do with the technology itself as an answer.
Okay.
But I think when people often say, well, I don't commit crimes, I'm happy for this kind of surveillance to be used, I think there's a lot of privilege in even saying a statement like that. I mean, if I could just take the example of whenever I have to apply for visas, right? I have a very poor passport, so I have to constantly apply for visas everywhere. And the UK government, in one of the forms that I have to fill out, I have to answer a series of questions that prove I have not had terrorist intent or engaged in that kind of activity or shown any form of support. And these are all very vaguely phrased questions, but that gives you that constant feeling that you are automatically in this category unless you can prove to us otherwise. Even though maybe that's not what they intend, but that's how I would often feel. And I mean, I'm still coming from this very privileged position of even being able to apply for visas and whatnot. So you could just imagine the folks who are constantly under surveillance because they grew up in a certain council house that might have had like the trends in the past that have given reason for police and law enforcement to believe that they need further monitoring of those spaces. So I think there is that privilege. And to those people who might still want to say that, regardless, and not want to confront that privilege, I would just say it is so easy for that privilege to also be taken away. And if you could just go back to the visa thing, it's not the same as crime and policing. But I remember the absolute shock everyone had when Brexit was introduced and people had to sign up for, stand in the different queues and sign up for different visas to go to different places. And they absolutely hated it. And I'm just saying this can't be taken away from you very easily. So maybe just probably err on the side of a group that's going to be harmed because one day you could be in that group too.
Great answers.
So, Jonah, do you think this links to Minority Report? I don't see much gun shooting and cool one-liners.
Well, yes, actually. No gun shooting yet, but the film's main themes explore the role of government in protecting its citizens versus their privacy and autonomy, the advances in technology and the potential problems of a technology as an infallible prosecutor, and the possibility of a pre-crime intervention. So, yes, in many ways, we are actually in the Minority Report, minus the mutants in sludge, obviously. But it's good to know that even though the headline was kind of attention grabby, it wasn't entirely hyped. Melina, as we head into this exciting future, let's imagine that Dr. Melina Kunar finds herself as Minister for Cognition and AI, or Minister for the Protection of Brains. What would be your first piece of legislation?
I think it would to be better educate people. And I mean people of all different backgrounds, all different demographics, all different ages, all different genders, absolutely everyone. So at the moment, I think the people that know about AI are the people that are excited about AI. Whereas my poor mum is terrified about AI.
Yeah.
So she doesn't have the same benefit. So if I had all the money in the world as Minister of Cognitive and AI events, I would make sure that everybody is educated, everybody has access, everybody has knowledge, the same knowledge about how to use AI.
Excellent. I like that. It's funny you mentioned your mum. I totally agree that these tools should be available for everybody if they want them. My parents, for example, right, have opposing approaches to their phone. My dad gets frustrated at his phone and angry at it and prods it. And my mum assumes it's her fault that she can't do something on her phone. And I think we should encourage like my dad's attitude. It's the phone's fault, not yours. And we should support, people like my mum. I think if these gadgets and their software don't come with instructions, like an older generation might be used to, then you're alienating this massive demographic. And that's unfair. And, it's really alienating, like I say. So I vote for you. I'd join your campaign.
Excellent. My second act would to me make sure that everybody, regardless of what generation, has watched Terminator.
And Minority Report, maybe. Cool. Well, Melina, thank you very, very much. It's lovely chatting to you.
Thank you so much.
We'll let you get back to work.
Thank you very much for this.
This month, the UK signed the first international treaty addressing risks of artificial intelligence. And where there's risks, there's concerns for vulnerable groups. And where there's concerns for vulnerable groups, there's Smera Jayadeva.
Always fighting the good fight. But yes, I was actually in Strasbourg over the weekend eating bread. I'm absolutely in love with butter now. I understand the whole marketing behind French cuisine. But I was also sitting in on a plenary session which reviewed our own work from the Turing on an end-to-end documentation process, which, while not legally binding, can be used by countries to implement the Convention on AI.
Wow, how privileged we are to have you, Smera. We're there at the coalface, boots on the ground, knuckle deep in the big AI news of the month.
Yes, you are indeed very lucky to have me.
So before we get into the work, could you tell us a bit about the convention itself?
So the Council of Europe Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence and Human Rights, Democracy and the Rule of Law is the first ever international legally binding treaty in this field.
And the Council of Europe is what? Does our exit from the EU not affect our status in this Council of Europe?
Not per se. So the Council of Europe, you could see it as like the human rights wing of the European Union, which centers on the European Convention on Human Rights. And as they write on their website, they represent a death penalty-free zone for more than 700 million people. And this includes the UK as well, who is still a volunteer member state. Right. It began with the intent to never again repeat the human rights violations that occurred during the World War.
Right, the bare minimum.
It also, very importantly, I think for our listeners to know, it differs from the political economic European Union in many ways. For one, it's not an economic institution. Two, participation is entirely voluntary. Three, the body focuses on soft law, whereby recommendations can be made which are not legally binding, or they can also sign conventions and treaties. The latter is also not legally binding in the same sense as laws passed by the European Parliament. So volunteer countries who sign and ratify a convention like the Convention on AI are morally and legally bound, but they can implement the convention clauses through their own national legislation.
Okay, so where does the Convention on AI stand? Aren't states bound by these principles of human rights anyway?
They should be, but the Convention on AI is essentially a multi-stakeholder forum, and it is conceived of this framework way back in 2019. They have worked with 46 members or volunteer states, including multiple observer states, including Japan, Australia, Peru, and Israel, and other representatives from civil society, academia, and industry. This includes our very own David Leslie, the director of the ethics team.
Woo. So what does this mean? There's a lot of lovely words there, but what is this going to do for me and our audience?
So the convention itself looks to ensure that the AI lifecycle, so the lifecycle of all the project decisions that are being made to implement an AI project, that this lifecycle upholds fundamental principles and rights such as equality and non-discrimination, the bare minimum. It sets out remedies so that decisions are documented and affected people can access the information and lodge complaints if an AI system were to infringe on their fundamental principles and the rights that they have as individuals. It also looks at carrying out risk and impact assessments on AI systems to even measure potential negative outcomes from a project, even the positive ones. Yeah.
Okay, so would they effectively tell a big company off if their AI systems are ruining somebody's fundamental rights?
Yeah, in a way, the provisions cover both public and private actors, but party states can choose to either directly comply with all of the provisions or modify based on national legislation, as I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. But they have to ensure that they nonetheless hold up international obligations on human rights. And and for many countries, this goes beyond just the EHRC or the European Convention, but it can also include other international obligations, say under the UN, that they have to be morally well-sounding actors. So if a company were to produce some questionable AI that is possibly going to harm a lot of people, they may be classed as high-risk AI and would have to then be very closely reviewed before they are allowed to cause the kind of negative damage that people believe that they can cause.
Okay. So the Turing are involved. What do we do in this big old thing?
So as part of this, we were asked by the Council to draft the Human Rights, Democracy and Rule of Law Impact Assessment, which affectionately and in line with the Turing's love for abbreviations, we call HUDERIA. The HUDERIA itself is made up of a preliminary risk analysis, stakeholder engagement, impact assessment, remediability, and iterative revisitation.
Of course it is. Hederia sounds like a mythical beast.
Hederia is a mythical beast of documentation.
So is this mythical beast, Hederia, part of the main convention, or is the Turing's work something separate?
No, it's not part of the main convention. The main convention has already been sent around for signatories, and many countries have already signed it, including the UK.
Yeah.
But our, you could say, addendum to that or provision to that convention is a non-legally binding framework which is aimed at providing end-to-end documentation and accountability mechanisms. So this is to ensure that project teams review the risks and impacts of their systems and engage with stakeholders and periodically revise these activities to make sure that it does not negatively harm those fundamental rights that I've mentioned before. So if, for instance, let's take an example. We're looking at developing a model for healthcare diagnostics. We would first have to review these risk factors, essentially checking if before development or even, after development, when we look at the domain that it's being used, is there any issues that arise? And because it is healthcare, yes, indeed, there are massive red flags over there. So we're already flagging up the system that there are these risk factors that could give rise to those kind of issues. We would then maybe engage with people on whom this technology would be used or other experts who can then give us more insights to make sure to really document what those kind of risks are, what we need to keep in mind, and also reflect on the positionality of the project team that's doing it. After that, we would then calculate whether the system would impact, say, the right against discrimination. And we know that there are massive risks of biases in healthcare when it comes to discrimination. But whilst exploring these negative impacts or even positive impacts, we should also be thinking about how do we remedy them. So we're providing solutions and thinking about ways we can mitigate those kind of risks at the same time. And I'm not saying that all risks are immediately remediable, but some of them should be considered before we proceed. So all of this, to document all of this, you need to do a lot of desk research. You need to do your own engagement. You need to start mapping out how your system's going to look. And putting all of this documentation together means that in the future, if there is an issue that comes, if an issue is flagged with the system, people can come back to this documentation, see who made a decision, why the decision was made, see whether they actually did the needful to review their system before it gets deployed.
What about corporations that make an AI in another country, which is implemented in one of the volunteer countries? How does that work? Complexities?
That would also come under it. Leaving aside our framework, because that's not something that's fully passed yet or taken on by many countries, and it's still in the process of being negotiated. The Convention on AI would mark these systems as high risk. And if they are high risk, they would be subject to further scrutiny. Okay. And in some cases, because this convention's in line with the EU AI Act, it could also look at banning or placing moratoria on the production and development of these kind of systems.
Oh, okay. So who does this? So it sounds like there's a big, to look at all this data that an AI is using and whatnot, it sounds like a perfect opportunity to use AI to do the job, right? Is it a human doing it?
Yes, there is a human doing it because we have the big issue of the accountability gap. We cannot hold machines responsible for any decisions that were being made. We need to hold a human responsible for them. So human project teams would be held responsible. So
essentially, this is a case of kind of what we always come back to: keep humans in the loop. Nothing for us without us, and other catchy catchphrases, right?
Yeah, that's right, Jonah. Nothing for us without us. And I think this is a very, very important step forward and at least gives a method for other countries around the globe to start working in this fashion towards greater regulation and oversight of AI systems that could possibly harm your basic fundamental rights, democracy, and the rule of law.
Yeah, get off my fundamental rights. Power to the peeps.
And democracy and the rule of law.
And them. Smera, how do you use a remote control to calm down a robot dog?
turn it off.
No, you press the pause button.
Okay, that is my fault. I did in fact egg Jonah on to make.
You asked for a dog joke.
I did.
You asked for it. So you've no doubt seen those robot dogs, the sort of headless ones that creep creepily. Well, one manufacturer in China, Unitree, who make robot dogs for industries to use that can carry supplies, be sent into a fire or emergency, or be used to check pipelines and infrastructure. They have just spotted that their robots are being used for military training with a gun on its back. So although that might not have been the intention for the robo-dogs, it's, to me, not a huge leap of the imagination to invent a gnarly robot and then be all surprised when someone welds an AK to its back.
Well, that is the problem with dual use. For listeners, dual use is usually applies to technology, software, hardware, and any other material that can be developed for both civilian and military purposes. So it may have originally been developed for civilian use, but then used by military, as in the case of this robot dog. But the reverse can also be true. For instance, a number of devices developed by DARPA, or the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, have since found their way into civilian gadgets like phones and cars.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious where the money is. The developments will be made, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I could ever so subtly make a reference back to microchips.
It all comes back to microchips.
It does, in fact, come back to microchips. It's a really important example. So the early development of semiconductors was largely funded by the US Department of Defense. And you can hear more about this in our previous episodes that covered the history of the chip wars, so to speak. To be fair, this was a war and post-war decade where private capital was not as freely available as today. So you would often turn to the military or the government to end up spending the kind of money they do to develop this kind of technology. But we've improved the technology so much that what was once used to improve airplane and fighter jet capabilities without that higher weight consideration, these are now technologies that are making help slimmer and more powerful phones.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? It makes me think of about how in Ukraine at the beginning of the conflicts, consumer drones and AI quickly gave Ukraine a sort of defense method against Russia's first attack on Kiev, I think it is. What seemed like a sort of inevitability was stopped by amateur drone pilots and amateur software engineers. Yeah, quickly, obviously, these drones have been adopted by forces, including Russia. And it's mad that a Patriot missile, which costs $4 million or something, is used to shoot these sort of 400 quid drones down.
Yeah, and drones are a very well-referenced example in the debates on dual use. But you know what powers drones? Semiconductors and microchips. So coming back to my example.
Go on.
In 2021, it was found that China was using US chips and software to develop missiles. This immediately led to US retaliation with an embargo on Chinese imports of US chip software and hardware. And again, keep in mind, the US companies like NVIDIA are some of the leading companies in this space. And US allies are also the ones producing the equipment that you need in order to produce these chips. Mm-hmm. And shocker, China retaliated to that retaliation by blocking sales of gallium and germanium. These are rare metals that are needed for semiconductor manufacturing. Often countries will employ similar export restrictions and embargoes on seemingly civilian devices to prevent countries from potentially developing arms with the same.
Okay, so it hasn't worked, has it? Because there's one of these robo-dogs has cropped up.
Yeah, that is some of the issues with dual use, because these embargoes can stifle innovation, not just for military purposes, but also for general civilian and consumer markets. They can also have the potential to disrupt markets of countries such as Australia, which is heavily reliant on import and export of goods. Before going into all of that, we should probably explore how the issues that might come up with dual use of AI systems.
Okay.
And, going with your example of drones, I'm not going to go back to semiconductors. AI models are often used in autonomous and semi-autonomous unmanned aerial vehicles or drones. these UAVs are increasingly democratized, which means that the computing and developing of models is far more easily available to individuals like ourselves. Okay, maybe not ourselves, but maybe coders, developers who have the knowledge and know-how of data science and software engineering to build these kind of models.
Right.
If we wanted to prevent a non-state actor, or for some countries, another state actor itself, from developing these models for military use or armed use, it faces numerous challenges.
So couldn't they stop companies from developing this kind of tech and AI?
No, because how do you even know it will be used for military purposes? Moreover, there are many cases of private companies working with governments to develop defense technology.
Yeah.
We have Parental making models for defense decision making, Clearview AI developing facial recognition, again, for uses, and so many other examples of the same.
I mean, it feels a bit like some of these things that you see being developed, particularly sort of robotics and AI being used in robotics, they already feel quite aggressive. That dog, it's not cuddly. It feels to me like, yeah, of course they're going to turn these robots into like gunning dogs. Like, in what world were they not going to?
So, of course, I completely get where you're coming from when you have these kind of concerns, or you can use any of them. But if we go back to our episode on cybersecurity and cyber weapons, so to speak, one of the issues was attribution. It's not only hard to ascertain who launched an attack, but it's even harder to limit who can maybe hack or release malware because of our incredibly interconnected world. It is a crime, but if you don't know who did it, how do you carry out justice? So in these cases, there are other regulations. For instance, there are those export control laws and export control laws that I'd mentioned before. There's also steps like certification for foreign researchers who may be involved with more sensitive projects. This is also the policy of the Turing itself and other research institutes, where we do not produce such technology, but we are strictly bound to follow legal and ethical regimes to prevent the creation of such forms of technology.
Yeah, and to be fair, on the other hand, you do hear about how AI can improve defense.
Okay, that's a hard one, because there's a difference between how people say that these kind of drones can reduce civilian casualties and what's actually happening on ground. Most civilians were killed in drone attacks in Pakistan and Afghanistan than the actual intended targets of those drone strikes. And this is also another can of worms, and it does raise important concerns in this debate, not only from that tech and military angle, but on-ground realities. For instance, many scholars highlight how the framing of these killer drones often places the blame on technology and leaves the human operators out of that critical evaluation.
Yeah, that's a good point. So to wrap this up then, what does it mean for the future? Surely developers know what they're doing and could add, obviously I'm not an expert, but couldn't they add a little kill switch that happens if it's used for naughty things? I mean, I don't know how that would work.
Yeah, there are avenues to limit those kind of negative externalities. And the kill switch that I would probably suggest is a good step forward is, say, the EU AI Act. Now, the EU AI Act doesn't cover national security, but it does have provisions for dual-use capabilities. Entities that develop models with higher risk profiles will be flagged. In some cases, as I mentioned before, a ban can even be imposed. Yeah. But I will say that countries can source elements from other parties nonetheless. And there are massive underground markets for these computer chips and whatnot. But there is still a long way to go to see how democracies and autocracies interact with dual-use technology and what we can do to prevent harm without stifling innovation.
Yeah, of course. Or else we wouldn't have wonderful things like the internet and podcasts.
Exactly. I mean, would we even be sitting here? But I will give a little history lesson to end this segment maybe. But dual-use research of concern as a concept began first with the Manhattan Project. We then had the Asiloma conference, and they banned genetic engineering, because there was a dual-use research of concern. And we can probably explore this topic in the future. But the issue is sometimes a lot more simple. So people use the example of the utility of a kitchen knife, but the same kitchen knife can be used to cause harm instead of cutting butter. But if we ban all knives, are we saving everyone? Is that actually going to entirely get rid of crime? I mean, it's important, don't get me wrong, that we should look at how we can reduce access to these kind of weapons when people are wielding it to harm others. But we should also be looking at why people may turn to violence and violent means. Of course, this isn't a conversation thread that traditional security theorists might be overjoyed by, but it's a good place to start a debate in a more holistic manner.
Well, there you go, folks. Another month in the can. What are our big lessons? Definitely that AI education is important, both for law enforcement and for parents. That the AI treaty is an important step to catching up with some of the more harmful developments in AI, and that if you see a cuddly robot dog, be wary. It might turn out to be scary. Thanks again to Dr. Melina Kunar. Thank you to Smera, as always, and Jessie for standing in for me last month. Please follow, like, subscribe, and so on. Check us on Instagram at TuringInst and chat to us at podcast@turing.ac.uk. Interact with us, please. It makes a huge difference and will help shape this podcast in the future better for you. Until next time, from Smera and I, goodbye.
Bye-bye.